Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to explore some new ideas.
Awesome. Well, today we're going to unpack some seriously counterintuitive advice from Paul Graham.
Oh, yeah, Paul Graham. He's always got something interesting to say.
He really does. Um, we're going to be diving into one of his YouTube lectures, and let me tell you, he does not sugarcoat things.
That's what I love about him.
Yeah.
He tells it like it is.
Exactly. So if you're interested in startups or even just thinking about starting a company someday, get ready to have some of your assumptions challenged.
I think we could all use a little bit of that, right? Challenging those assumptions.
For sure. Okay, so one of the first things that really stood out to me in this lecture was Graham's analogy of learning to ski.
Oh, yeah, I remember that analogy,
He actually compares starting a business to learning to ski.
which is kind of brilliant when you think about it.
It is. So explain that a little bit for our listeners.
Okay, so imagine you're a total newbie on the slopes, right? And you're going downhill, and you kind of instinctively want to lean back.
To slow down.
Yeah, exactly. Like you want to lean back to slow yourself down, but that's actually the worst thing you can do.
It's counterintuitive.
It is. Because what happens is you just end up careening downhill, totally out of control.
And I feel like that's kind of how a lot of people approach starting a business, too.
It is. They rely on their gut instincts, which might work in other areas of life.
But not so much in the startup world.
Not so much in the startup world, because like skiing, starting a business is counterintuitive.
You have to kind of do the opposite of what you think you should do sometimes.
Right. And that's what's so interesting about Graham's perspective. He sees that a lot of founders come in with these preconceived notions.
From their previous experiences.
Yeah, whether it's from working at a big company or, from school.
And he actually jokes in this lecture that his main job at Y Combinator was telling founders things that they would inevitably ignore.
Yeah, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
It's like founders are almost hardwired to resist advice, even when it comes from people who've been there, done that.
Yeah, it's like they think they know better.
Well, I think part of it is that counterintuitive ideas just feel wrong at first.
Because they go against everything we've been taught.
Exactly. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, that'll never work, or that's just crazy talk.
But Graham has seen firsthand that sometimes those crazy ideas are the ones that end up changing the world.
Right. And I think that's what makes him such a valuable voice in the startup community. He's not afraid to challenge the status quo.
So while he cautions against blindly trusting your instincts in the startup world, there is one area where he says your gut feeling is king.
Oh, really? So there's something we should trust our instincts on.
I know, right? I was surprised too. It all comes down to judging people.
Judging people, like who to hire.
Exactly. Choosing co-founders, early employees, investors even.
Okay, so you're saying we shouldn't overthink it, just go with our gut.
Well, Graham basically says that you don't need some fancy business school formula to assess character.
I like that. It's more about that human connection.
Yeah, he suggests choosing co-founders and early employees the same way you'd pick friends.
Which makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Because startups are intense.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You're going to be spending a lot of time with these people.
You need to know that they have your back, that you can trust them.
That they're not going to bail on you at the first sign of trouble.
Right. So building a strong team is all about those personal connections and shared values.
And I think that's something that a lot of people overlook when they're starting a company.
They get so caught up in the business plan and the product.
But they forget that it's the people who make it all happen.
Absolutely.
Oh.
So does this mean that you don't actually need to be a quote-unquote startup expert to build a successful company?
That's a really good question.
Because that's kind of a relief to hear.
I know, right? It can feel really intimidating to think that you need to have all this specialized knowledge before you can even start.
So what does Graham say about that?
Well, he has a really interesting take on it. He argues that expertise in your users trumps startup expertise any day.
Expertise in your users? So you're saying it's more important to understand the people you're serving?
Exactly. He uses the example of Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
Because Facebook's success wasn't because Mark was some kind of startup whiz kid who knew all the tricks of the trade.
It was because he understood something fundamental about human behavior.
Right. He tapped into that desire for connection and validation and sharing.
And he built a platform that allowed people to do that in a really easy and engaging way.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important lesson for anyone who's thinking about starting a company.
It's not about mastering mechanics of entrepreneurship.
It's about understanding the needs and desires of your target audience.
And then building something that meets those needs.
Right. So does that mean all that stuff about fundraising and perfect business plans is just a distraction?
Well, Graham actually has a rather pointed term for founders who focus on the superficial aspects of a startup without addressing the core value proposition.
Oh, really? What's that?
He calls it playing house.
Playing house.
Yeah, like imagine a team that's obsessed with having a fancy office space and all the latest gadgets.
And free snacks.
Oh yeah, definitely free snacks.
Yeah.
But they're not actually building anything that people want.
They're just kind of going through the motions.
Exactly. And that's what Graham calls playing house.
I see. So it's like they're more focused on the image of being a startup than on actually creating something valuable.
Right. And I think there are unfortunately plenty of real-world examples of startups that have gone down that rabbit hole.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Remember Juicero?
Oh, God, Juicero, the poster child for playing house?
That company raised millions of dollars for a high-tech juicer that basically just squeezed prepackaged bags of fruit pulp.
It was ridiculous.
It was. And people quickly realized that they could just squeeze the bags by hand.
And the whole thing imploded.
It did. It's a classic case of getting caught up in the hype without delivering real value.
So the lesson here is, don't be a Juicero.
Yeah, don't be a juicero. Focus on building something that people actually need and want.
Okay, so if all that superficial stuff is just a distraction, what does Graham say about the whole gaming the system mentality?
That's another really interesting point. He's very clear that tricks and shortcuts that might work in large companies or traditional career paths just don't fly in the startup world.
So you can't really fake it till you make it?
Nope, not in the long run.
Yeah.
You might be able to fool investors for a while with smoke and mirrors.
But eventually the truth will come out.
It always does. And at the end of the day, you're judged on one thing and one thing only.
Whether you create something valuable for users.
Exactly. And that's what's so refreshing about the startup world.
It's all about creating real value, not just playing games.
Right. And that ties into Graham's next point beautifully.
Yeah.
He emphasizes that startups are all-consuming.
Oh, yeah. He's not kidding about that.
Launching a company isn't just a job, it's a life choice.
A demanding one at that.
He even compares it to having kids in terms of how it irrevocably changes your life.
Which is a pretty accurate comparison, I think.
It is. You're constantly on call, constantly thinking about the business.
It's like you're always running a marathon.
He paints this vivid picture of Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, constantly running.
Always on, always dealing with some urgent fire.
And that's the reality of running a successful startup.
There's this relentless pace and pressure that never really lets up.
So while it might seem glamorous from the outside,
The reality is it demands an incredible amount of dedication and sacrifice.
it's definitely not for the faint of heart.
Right.
Yeah, it's not something you can just dip your toe into. You have to be all in.
No half measures.
Exactly. And this actually leads to another interesting point that Graham makes. He argues that you can't truly know if you're cut out for the startup life until you're in the thick of it.
So you can't really predict how you'll handle the pressure until you're facing it head on.
Right. It's like a trial by fire. You might think you have what it takes, but until you're actually in the trenches dealing with the day-to-day chaos, you don't really know.
Makes sense. But wait, didn't Graham also advise against starting a company in college?
Yeah, he's not a fan of the whole college dropout turned entrepreneur narrative.
But doesn't that contradict this whole jump in and see if you sink or swim idea?
Well, it's not really a contradiction. He's not saying that young people shouldn't be ambitious or entrepreneurial.
It's more about timing.
Exactly. He believes that your early 20s are a precious time for exploration.
Like a time to kind of figure out who you are and what you're passionate about.
Right. And he worries that diving into the startup world too soon can actually rob you of those formative experiences.
So what's the rush?
Yeah, exactly. There's so much to be gained from taking the time to explore different paths before committing to one.
Like what kind of experiences is he talking about?
We talked about things like throwing yourself into projects on a whim, traveling without a rigid itinerary, just giving yourself the space to discover what truly excites you.
Okay. So it's not necessarily about gaining specific skills or knowledge.
It's more about broadening your horizons, having new experiences, meeting different people.
And those experiences might not seem directly relevant to starting a company at the time.
But they shape who you are as a person. And that's invaluable in the long run.
It's like they lay the foundation for your future success.
Exactly. So even though it might seem counterintuitive, taking some time to explore before diving into the startup world could actually set you up for greater success in the long run.
That's a really interesting perspective. I think a lot of people, especially young people, feel this pressure to launch their career as soon as possible.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But it's important to remember that there's no one right path, and that taking some detours can actually lead you to something even better.
So college is for exploring, not launching the next unicorn.
Pretty much.
Mm.
But let's be real. I think the question on everyone's mind is, how do you actually get those brilliant startup ideas?
Yeah, everyone wants to know the secret formula.
Well, here's where Graham's advice takes another unexpected turn. He says the best way to get startup ideas is to not actively try to think of them.
Wait, what? You're telling me I shouldn't brainstorm?
That's exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but stick with me. He argues that forcing yourself to brainstorm often leads to ideas that sound good on paper, but lack real substance.
So they're not actually solving a real problem.
Right, they're solutions searching for problems.
So how did all those successful companies come up with their game-changing ideas? Were they just lucky?
I don't think it's about luck. Think about it. Companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, they weren't born out of some calculated scheme to get rich quick.
So they weren't sitting in a room with a whiteboard trying to come up with the next big thing?
Nope. These started as side projects, passion projects, solutions to very specific problems the founders themselves were facing.
So the secret sauce is genuine curiosity and a desire to solve real problems.
Exactly. And that's what Graham is getting at. He believes that when you're truly passionate about something and eager to learn, you're more likely to stumble upon ideas that have real potential.
It's not about chasing trends, it's about following your own curiosity.
Right. And I think that's a really powerful message. It's about cultivating a mind that's open to possibilities rather than trying to force a eureka moment.
So instead of trying to predict the future, you become so immersed in what's happening now that the next logical step reviews itself.
Exactly. It's like you're creating the conditions for serendipity.
I love that.
Yeah.
And to cultivate that kind of idea-generating mindset, Graham actually offers a pretty simple recipe.
Oh, really? I'm all ears. What's the secret formula?
Well, he breaks it down into 3 key ingredients. First, learn as much as you can about things that matter. Second, work on problems that genuinely intrigue you. And third, surround yourself with people you like and respect who share your passion.
So it's not just about being brilliant or technically gifted. It's about engaging with the world, finding problems that resonate with you, and collaborating with people who inspire you.
You nailed it. And this is where domain expertise comes in.
Ah, so you're saying it's not enough to just have a great idea? You also need to have a deep understanding of the problem you're trying to solve.
Exactly. Graham argues that the most successful founders are deeply knowledgeable about the specific problems they're trying to solve. They're not just chasing trends, they're immersed in the nuances of their chosen field.
That makes sense. Do you have any examples?
Take the Airbnb founders, for example. They weren't tech wizards. They were designers with a deep understanding of hospitality and the sharing economy.
So their success stemmed from that expertise, not from some mythical startup gene.
Exactly. And I think that's a really encouraging message for anyone who's thinking about starting a company.
It means that you don't have to be a technical genius or a business guru to succeed.
You just need to be passionate about something and willing to put in the hard work to learn everything you can about it.
And to find those problems that are worth solving, Graham encourages us to think of technology as a constantly expanding frontier.
With the edges representing the most interesting and potentially lucrative problem.
Exactly. And to find those problems, he says you have to live in the future.
Live in the future. What does that even mean? Am I supposed to buy a time machine?
Huh. No DeLorean required. It's more about immersing yourself in emerging technologies and trends, becoming so familiar with them that what seems groundbreaking to others feels obvious to you.
So it's about pushing the boundaries of knowledge, not just keeping up with the status quo.
Exactly. It's about anticipating what's next and being able to see the potential that others might miss.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Do you have any examples of people who are living in the future?
Well, Graham tells a great story about a friend of his at Harvard who wrote his own voice-over IP software back in the mid-90s.
Wow. Back when internet calling was still science fiction.
I know, right? And he didn't do it to start a company or anything. He did it just to talk to his girlfriend in Taiwan without racking up long-distance charges.
He created his own internet calling system just to chat with his girlfriend. That's dedication.
It is. But it also illustrates Graham's point. His friend was so immersed in the world of technology that it seemed obvious to him that you could turn sound into packets and send them over the internet for free.
So he was living the future while everyone else was still stuck in the present.
Exactly. And that's the power of genuine curiosity. It can lead to breakthroughs that you never even imagined.
This is blowing my mind. So you're saying that the key to finding those game-changing startup ideas is to not focus on startups at all.
In a way, yes. It's about cultivating a mindset of continuous learning and exploration.
And trusting that the dots will connect eventually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about Graham's advice. It's not just about starting companies, it's about living a more engaged and fulfilling life.
It's funny because so much of what we've talked about today feels like it applies to everyone, not just aspiring entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really about cultivating a mindset of continuous learning and exploration, no matter what you're passionate about.
Right, like anyone can benefit from being more curious and engaged with the world.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Graham's advice so powerful. It's not just for a niche audience, it's for anyone who wants to make a difference.
For sure. But I think for someone who is dreaming of launching a company someday, Graham's advice can feel almost radical. Like he's saying, don't focus on startups, just learn.
It does sound a bit paradoxical, doesn't it?
It does. But it's also incredibly profound when you think about it.
Right, he's basically saying that the best way to prepare for a startup is to become a lifelong learner.
To immerse yourself in knowledge, explore things that fascinate you, and trust that those experiences will guide you to the right opportunities.
Exactly. It's like he's encouraging us to trust that the dots will connect eventually.
Which can be a really hard thing to do,
Yeah.
especially in a world that's so obsessed with immediate results.
It is. But I think that's what separates the truly successful entrepreneurs from the rest. They're not afraid to take the long view.
They're not just chasing trends, they're building something meaningful.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Graham's analogy of technology spreading like a fractal stain.
Oh, yeah. I love that analogy.
It's so powerful, right? He's saying that the most interesting and potentially lucrative problems lie at the edges of that expanding frontier.
So we need to be at the edges pushing the boundaries. But how do we even know where those edges are?
Well, it's about immersing yourself in those emerging fields, those areas where technology is intersecting with human needs in new and unexpected ways.
Okay. So it's about identifying the problems that haven't been solved yet, the questions that haven't even been asked.
Exactly. It's not just about keeping up with the latest trends. It's about developing a deep understanding of those trends.
And seeing the potential that others might miss.
Right. It's about living in the future, as Graham puts it.
Living in the future. I like that. It sounds a lot more exciting than just keeping up with the present.
Uh-huh. It is. And it's about becoming so familiar with these emerging technologies that what seems revolutionary to others feels intuitive to you.
This has been an incredible deep dive. It feels like we've been given a whole new framework for thinking about entrepreneurship.
Me too.
Mm.
And I think what's so exciting about it is that it's not just about starting companies. It's about living a more curious and fulfilling life.
Absolutely. It's about embracing the unknown and trusting that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's what I hope our listeners take away from this conversation.
I agree. So if you're feeling inspired to explore those uncharted territories, to dive deep into something that truly fascinates you, then you're already on the right path.
And who knows? Maybe you'll stumble upon the next big idea, even if you're not actively looking for it.
That's the beauty of it. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked some new ideas and encouraged you to embrace the power of just learning.
Absolutely. Until next time, everyone, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing those boundaries.
And remember, the future is waiting.